When justice reflects the heart of God, Leviticus can be tough to get through. It's full of laws, rules, and rituals. But when we slow down and read carefully, something beautiful happens. We begin to see the heart of God behind every command. This law was not merely human. It was divinely given, commanding things that go against human nature. In chapter 19, God teaches Israel how to love their neighbor and gives what Jesus later called the second greatest commandment in the law, a truth that carries into the kingdom he came to establish. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. What God is doing in this important book is teaching his people how to live together. While other nations followed false gods and human traditions, Yahweh was raising up a people sanctified for himself, a nation that would become a light leading all others to him. This law was centuries ahead of its time. It revealed a moral framework where justice protected the weak, honored the innocent, and saw all people as equal before God. That same principle would later shape the Judeo-Christian values that influenced Western law. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. Leviticus 19:15. But human nature has not changed much. We see the erosion of these foundations in our own time. Too often, justice bends toward identity instead of truth, and guilt or innocence depends more on who a person is than on what actually happened. It is troubling, but it also reminds us how desperately our world needs the righteousness of God. Even so, many judges and leaders still strive to rule fairly, and many still reflect the biblical call to justice. Yet our culture often pits one group against another, distorting truth for personal or political gain. As followers of Christ, though, we are called to something higher. We are still called to love our neighbors as ourselves. We are still called to judge fairly, not by status, but by what is right. We are still called to give generously, not because someone has earned it, but because God has given freely to us. This is how we reflect the image of our King. Leviticus begins to form this kind of thinking by teaching us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And throughout the book, we find a promise of what is coming. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:9-10. When Moses wrote those words, Israel had no fields or vineyards. They were still wandering in the wilderness. Yet even then, God was preparing them for a future of blessing, teaching them how to live with generosity and justice once they reached the promised land. In the same way, we too are sojourners waiting for our promised home. As we wander through this world, we love our neighbors, live with integrity, and shine the light of Jesus in a culture darkened by sin. We practice now what we will one day see perfected in his kingdom. So how can we live this out today? We can start by slowing down before we speak judgment over others. Do we look for the facts before we decide who is right or wrong? Or are we quick to judge based on who someone is rather than what is true? Do we listen with humility before we form opinions? Or do we assume we already know the story? When someone is in need, do we hold tightly to what we have? Or do we look for ways to share what God has given us? Loving our neighbor often begins in these small moments, when we choose truth over assumption, mercy over pride, and generosity over comfort. Every time we do, we reflect the justice and compassion of King Jesus in a world that desperately needs to see his heart. Leviticus prepares us for this life, and Jesus fulfills it in his kingdom. What truth from this passage stands out to you most today? How can we reflect God's justice and love more deeply in our world? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you in the comments.